If your child had a prior COVID infection and you know, as a parent, you thought, you know what, they have a certain amount of immunity, I don't need to get them vaccinated. Does Omicron really just completely change that because we're seeing so many reinfections?
Yeah, what was interesting, 'cause as you mentioned earlier, I'm on the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee. When we, at the end of October, considered vaccines for the 5 to 11-year-old, the statistic that amazed me the most that was presented by the CDC was that 42% of 5 to 11-year-olds were seropositive, meaning had already been infected, meaning most likely had already been asymptomatically infected. Still, they clearly benefit from getting a vaccine because it boosts their immune system and then will provide longer, better protection. So yes, I think it's still a value to get a vaccine, even if you've been infected, which is typically an asymptomatic infection, which may be to some extent less immunogenic than a more florid infection.
Well, that's what I'm wondering too is, you know, with the testing, should asymptomatic people be testing themselves? Are there limitations to the sensitivity of these tests? Will it give them a false sense of security if they test negative?
The testing issue has been confusing for a lot of reasons. I think one, testing isn't available everywhere, and so it's hard to get a test. Two, sometimes you get a test and you have to wait 3 days to get the result back, which doesn't really help you in terms of making an immediate decision. Three, what you really want to know is if I test positive by an antigen detection assay, or if I test positive by the PCR testing, the molecular testing, what does that mean? I mean, does that mean I'm contagious? We certainly know that the PCR testing can be positive for many weeks and sometimes as long as a few months, and you're not contagious. So in some ways, it's a little too sensitive. And then for the antigen testing, what you really want to know is when I'm antigen positive, does that mean I'm contagious? And the only way to really know that is to compare your positivity and antigen tests and then do contact tracing studies, which no one's going to do at this point. So you're not going to really know. So I think what the CDC said initially a couple of weeks ago, which actually made a lot of sense to me, was if you have COVID, then you should stay home until you have no symptoms. And then you can go out and wear a mask. And they didn't talk about testing initially, and I actually like that idea because I thought that, you know, the testing issue was so confounding that it would just make more sense that when you no longer have symptoms, you are very, very unlikely to be contagious, because the way this virus works and the way every respiratory virus works is initially you come in contact with the virus. It reproduces itself in your upper respiratory tract. And so the virus reproduces itself hundreds of times, thousands of times. That's when you're most contagious, before you ever develop any symptoms. When you're pre-symptomatic, that's when you're most contagious. So you don't even know you're contagious, and that's why this virus spreads so easily, because a lot of people don't know they're contagious. Now you're developing symptoms. When you develop symptoms, which is really a product of your immune system, then virus replication begins to decrease. So by the time you're asymptomatic, you have no symptoms, you probably aren't shedding much virus anymore.
All right.